I'm Irvin Emanuel. Everybody calls me Irv, or almost everybody, and I'm an emeritus professor of epidemiology and pediatrics. I have been at the University of Washington in one capacity or another since 1961. I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, and in southern New Jersey, and I'm a veteran of World War II, which is how I got my education, because I shudder to think what would have happened if I did not have the GI Bill. But after my service, I did go to Rutgers University, where I received a Bachelor of Science degree in biological sciences. And at that time, I had no money for medical school, although that was my eventual goals. But I got interested in anthropology and got a master's degree in anthropology at the University of Arizona in Tucson. Then I had a job. I had my first position as an anthropologist was at Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio, where I was assistant director of an Air Force physical anthropological research project that helped to design equipment, high altitude equipment and other equipment for Air Force pilots and other personnel. After Antioch, I did go to work directly with the Air Force at the Aerospace Medical Laboratory nearby in Dayton, Ohio, and then decided that I could manage to go to medical school. I saved my money and enrolled at the University of Rochester in New York. I graduated there in 1960, and fortunately for me, the work I did at the Aerospace Medical Laboratory was very successful, so I was hired during the summers of medical school. At that time, summers were off for medical students. I guess that isn't the case anymore, but I was hired as a consultant at the staggering sum of $35 a day, which I guess now is not quite minimum wage, but it was a lot of money in those days. I interned in pediatrics at Cleveland Metropolitan General Hospital, where Fred Robbins, the Nobel Prize winner, was chief of pediatrics. Unfortunately, I had a sort of a mixed internship where I wanted to be a pediatrician, but for the first 3 months, they put me on the medical service, and so by the time I needed to make a decision about next year, I had no experience with pediatrics. And the University of Washington was interested. They were having trouble. It was a new medical school. They were having trouble getting residents and interns, and they offered me a residency in pediatrics, and I grabbed it. I had a spirit of adventure in those days, and I liked the West, having been in Arizona, so I came out here as a pediatric resident and worked at the new University of Washington Hospital, which had just been built, and at Children's Hospital. I got partially disillusioned with clinical pediatrics, and I had decided I was going to be an epidemiologist anyway. I made that decision in medical school, and the new department, or Tom Grayston had been brought to UW to rejuvenate the Department of Preventive Medicine, and they offered me a postdoctoral fellowship and I started that in 1962. I guess I was the first fellow in the new department. It wasn't a new department, it was a rejuvenated Department of Preventive Medicine. So I was the first fellow. I was sorry I did not continue in pediatrics. I think it was a hasty decision, but I was allowed to have a joint fellowship in pediatrics and preventive medicine, which I enjoyed. And after I finished my fellowship, I joined the faculty of both departments. But since I was the first fellow in the department, there were great opportunities for travel. They had nobody else to send on some of these collaborations that I guess specifically Russ Alexander had with the Arctic Health Research Center in Anchorage, and also since Tom Grayston had worked at the U.S. Naval Medical Research Unit number 2 and in Taipei, Taiwan, Russ had some projects going on in Taiwan as well. So I had wonderful travel as a postdoctoral fellow. I had 3 chores to do in Alaska, in Sitka, Alaska, in Hooper Bay, Alaska, which was a Eskimo village on the Bering Sea, and on St. Paul Island in the middle of the Bering Sea, one of the first seal islands. And these projects had to do with measles. The first measles vaccine had been approved, and since in these populations in Alaska, measles was a devastating disease with high case fatality rates, Russ was concerned about making sure that the new vaccine had fewer side effects than the wild disease. So I had these great opportunities for travel, and given my background in anthropology, I thoroughly enjoyed those experiences. Tom Grayston had a training grant which involved Taiwan, specifically the U.S. Naval Medical Research Unit, where he had worked. So I had the opportunity to be the first postdoctoral fellow to go to Taiwan for part of my postdoctoral experience. At the same time, Russ Alexander was going there as a faculty and as my mentor. So I stayed there for 2 years, and I had gotten interested in birth defects as a pediatrician, and that's mostly what I did. I did a fairly large study of birth prevalence of birth defects in, pregnancy outcome in 6 Taipei civilian hospitals. As a postdoctoral fellow, I had my own Chinese postdoctoral fellow who was a pediatrician who had 1 year less experience, less training than I did, and I had a technician and 2 nurses. It was an economic paradise at that time. With very little money, a lot of research could be accomplished because salaries of the medical people was so low, although the competence of the people I worked with was very high. They did great work, they were well educated, and I managed to get a lot of work done. When I finished, when I was finishing, Tom Grayston offered me a position as assistant professor of preventive medicine, which I accepted. And at the end of my stay in Taiwan, I was invited to join a Harvard University Peabody Museum anthropological, medical, dental expedition to the Solomon Islands. And I accepted. I thought this was a great opportunity. And we studied 2 groups of the indigenous people. In Bougainville, which was part of Papua New Guinea, administered by the Australians, and a group called the Nasioi and a group called the Koyo on the island of Maleta. Bougainville had been involved in the World War II, but Maleta, because of the fierceness of the people, both the Allies and the Japanese avoided that. That's the island right next to Guadalcanal. So I had great experience there too. And I had come down with anapteric hepatitis, became symptomatic in Australia on the way to the expedition, and spent 10 days in Port Moresby General Hospital in Papua New Guinea. After the expedition, I came back to Seattle and started my duties here.
What year would this have been?
I came back in 1966. I was in Taiwan 64 to 66.
Why don't we take a look at that photo next to you, since that's 1964.
Yes, I recognize all these people. Here's Russ Alexander, who was my mentor and my longtime, very good friend. I owe a lot to Russ Alexander. Tom Grayston took a chance on me. Lots of people took a chance on me, and he certainly did, and I am certainly grateful for the opportunities that he offered me. This is J.Y. Peng, who's Taiwanese. He was deputy director of the Maternal and Child Health Center in Taichung, Taiwan, where I worked at when I first went to Taiwan. George Lee is a Taiwanese pediatrician who came here to get his master's degree, as did J.Y. Pung. Sanitar Deer is an Indian ophthalmologist who came here for his graduate work, and I recently heard from him. Some of the people who are still here: Jack Hatlin, George Kenny, of course Russ, Ed Perrin, Pete Bricey, that's me there. Anyway, another international student was Dr. In-Ho Chu, who was a professor of obstetrics in South Korea. So even with a small, and that's Hjordis Foy, who I guess was the second postdoctoral fellow hired.
So if you hold it towards us, can you point where you are again?
I'm here.
Well, for a small department, that was a very international cast of players.
Oh, it certainly was. And Ruth Portman was a statistician. I guess Russ was the first new faculty member that Tom hired. George Kenny was the second. I worked with George Kenny for my master's degree research, which was on cytomegalic inclusion viral disease. I guess Ed Perrin was the third new faculty member. Jack Hatlin and Pete Bricey had already been here for some time. And additional fellows, Roger Deedles, who ended up for a time as Dean of the School of Public Health at UCLA, and Ted Dagey, another pediatrician who ended up working for the American Medical Association as an epidemiologist. George Deniston was active in family planning organizations. Anyway, it was a great group of people. I remember all of them very fondly. It was a department in the School of Medicine, and there was a great deal of collegiality because Tom used to throw parties for everybody in his home. So everybody, and not only Tom, but others. We got to know each other rather well. There was less social distance, and it was a great time to be alive, really.
It sounds like it. So you came back in approximately 1966. Take us through the next 4 years, because coming up is the establishment of the School of Public Health as a separate school in 1970. So take us through that period of transition from moving from a department to becoming your own school, if you would, please.
Well, one of the I had a couple of chores. First of all, Russ Alexander, it was a department, and he was head of the section on epidemiology, or the division. It was a division of epidemiology. He proposed me for a NIH Research Career Development Award, which paid my salary and other benefits for 5 years. So another great opportunity for me. For a while I taught the course in international health and continued my research. I still had a research grant. well, the Research Career Development Award allowed money for research. And I also coordinated the summer program in epidemiology for medical students and dental students who came from all over the country, not only UW, but other schools in the country. I continued working at the birth defects clinic at Children's Hospital on a part-time basis, so I worked in 2 departments. In 1970, yes, we became a school of public health, I guess for a variety of reasons, but partly because it allowed for more financial support as a school of public health rather than a department of preventive medicine in a medical school. But there were other reasons. We were getting big enough and complex enough and good enough. So we became a school of public health. In 1973, Tom Grayston, who had become, well, he is the founding dean, of course, of the School of Public Health, and he became the vice president for health sciences for the university. And in 1972, I guess, the end of 1972, he asked me to apply for the position of director of the Child Development and Mental Retardation Center, which was a new center. There were 12 such centers established because of President Kennedy's interest in mental retardation and other developmental disabilities. And I guess between Senator Magnuson and Senator Jackson, UW was able to get a substantial amount of money to build what at the time was the biggest such center in the country, which I guess was formally established in 1989. And there was private money involved also. It was an interdisciplinary, interdepartmental, inter-school center involving research, child education, special education, and clinical training and clinical service. The first director retired, and for reasons which are still not quite clear to me, Tom Grayston asked me to apply for the job. And realistically, I have to confess that I was a dark horse candidate. I still don't know exactly why he did this, but he was taking another chance on me. And I did get the job, which I started in early 1973. And continued in that capacity until 1983, for 10 years. And then I decided, I gave up clinical work during that time. I couldn't handle everything decently, I felt, and I continued teaching my course and having graduate students in epidemiology and doing my administrative work and whatever research I could manage. But in 1983, I decided to go back to the Department of Epidemiology and see if I could pursue some additional research that interested me. I had become interested in intergenerational growth, how growth and health proceeds from one generation to the next on a non-genetic environmental basis, which was not a very popular topic at the time. It recently has become a very popular topic. Well, anyway, Gil Oman was dean at the time, and just about the time that I resigned, the Maternal and Child Health Bureau of the Public Health Service had decided they wanted to fund 4 or 5 additional public health training programs in maternal and child health. And I had dealt with that particular agency, the Maternal and Child Health Bureau, for a number of years since they supported our clinical training program at CDMRC. So Gil asked me to apply for one of these grants, which I did and was successful. So in 1983, we got the grant to start the Maternal and Child Health Program, which is still going strong in spite of the rather meager support of the university, if I may say so. It was also another interdisciplinary program. Of course, it was a much smaller program, and we had a smaller faculty, but it has always been an interdisciplinary program. I invited Fred Connell to be associate director with me when we applied for the grant. Fred Connell is now associate dean for curriculum. So we were successful, and we had a variety of students. This was a domestic program primarily. The funding agency wanted us to train Americans. It was not, to deal with maternal and child health problems in our own country. And we trained people at the master's level and at the PhD level, mostly at the master's level, and mostly pre-doctorals, but we had some postdoctoral fellows who were pediatricians or obstetricians, mostly pediatricians, and some of them have gone on to do some very nice things in their careers. Well, I don't know, that's coming to, I guess I had gotten interested in the intergenerational growth phenomenon, and there was one place, it was very difficult to get such data, to do such studies in this country, but one of the people I had met going to the various meetings was Eva Alberman, who's professor of clinical epidemiology at the London Hospital Medical College. and the leaders in this field of intergenerational growth and health, in fact, at the time, were British. And the British had done several national studies of all births in 1 month in March in 1946 and in 1958, and they had followed up. They'd done 10-year or various follow-ups of the people who were studied at birth, whose mothers and births were studied. And so this was a great source of data to do the kind of studies that I could do and wanted to do. And Eva Alberman, Dr. Alberman, was also interested in this topic. And so together we applied for an NIH grant, which partially supported the research that I was going to do, that we were going to do together. And I received a NIH Fogarty International Center Senior Fellowship, which partially supported my research and made up the difference between my cut in salary as a sabbatical person and what I needed to live on in Britain, which was very expensive at the time, since I went there in 1987, right at the time of the October 1987 stock market minor crash. But I went over there, spent a year, and was able to do a fair amount of research with my colleagues, primarily Eva Alberman and Stephen Evans, who was a statistician. And we published several papers. And one of the important papers, there are several important papers. One that we traced the intergenerational growth phenomenon to how maternal grandmothers grew. We were the first ones to show that birth weight of the grandchild was related to the stature, the height of the maternal grandmother. And so we were able to do a number of studies of importance. And when I went back from my sabbatical, I applied for a research grant because I figured out, because the vital statistics in Washington State are superior to those of most other states, I figured out how we could do such studies in this country, in Washington State, and I applied for a research grant. I applied to NIH, and twice they turned me down. And I also applied to the Maternal and Child Health Bureau, which had supported some of our work at CDMRC and was continuing to support our research for the Maternal and Child Health Program. And they awarded me a research grant. And with my colleagues here, working with the Washington State Center for Health Statistics, we were able to link some 46,000 births of mothers in 4 ethnic groups: whites, Hispanics, Native Americans, and African Americans. 46,000 births. We were to the mother's own birth certificate, so we had data on the mother's own birth, and also to get their the mother's and grandmother's stature, their height, from the database of the driver's license division. And so we've done a number of studies. My colleagues there were a number, but Michelle Williams, who is now professor of epidemiology, Wendy Lysenring, who's a statistician at the Hutch, and Bill O'Brien, who is their great scientific programmer at the Department of Epidemiology, and several others. And Christy Kempo, who was my research analyst, who is a PhD psychologist. So we had some success, and right about this time, the intergenerational phenomenon is now getting to be very important, because how people grow is related to various chronic diseases. Besides, we studied primarily pregnancy problems and pregnancy outcome, but others have studied coronary disease, hypertension, stroke, and type 2 diabetes, which now is a very hot topic. So anyway, that's about it. My last papers were published in December of 2004.
On the subject of intergenerational?
Yes, on intergenerational phenomenon. 2 papers in the International Journal of Epidemiology. I was invited to give the keynote address at the Society for Pediatric and Perinatal Epidemiological Research in June, and I was also invited in November to do the Distinguished Faculty Lecture for the School of Public Health for the fall quarter. I'm still trying to do a little writing in my retirement, and trying to have a little fun and deal with the infirmities of age, mostly successfully, I think. But I look back on a great experience here at UW, and great opportunities, and hope I've done well enough by then, and because they've certainly done well enough by me.
Well, I think it was one of these mutually profitable relationships, because you would not have received the honors and the accolades of your colleagues like you have if you hadn't produced so wonderfully. A couple things I'd like to ask you, especially since Russ Alexander isn't here to give his own impressions of things. I wonder if you could give some impressions of some of the personalities who led the school, or or led the department or were highly instrumental in its development. People like Russ Alexander, Bob Day, Tom Grayston.
Yeah, well, Tom Grayston, of course, was, I think, the indispensable person in all of this. I mean, he was the guy with the organizational skills and the scientific skills to pull this off, I think. And he had very good judgment about who the people he hired. As I say, Russ Alexander, and George Kinney, Ed Perrin, Donovan Thompson later, and Bob Day. I was closest to Russ. Russ, we were in Taiwan together. Russ Alexander and I were in Taiwan together. Then he's the one who, again, took a chance on me when he was head of the epidemiology division and supported me for a Research Career Development Award from NIH. When the Cultural Revolution ended in China, President John Hogness, and Nixon had gone to China, and China was opening up, and President Hogness wanted to establish some associations with Chinese universities because, we're on the Pacific Rim, and he had a great interest in China too, I believe. And so he found money to support a faculty delegation to the People's Republic of China. And I think Tom Grayston was one of the people helping to make those selections. I applied for a chance to go to China. I'm a bit of a Sinophile, and I was saying at that time, I need to go to China before I die. And I was selected along with Russ Alexander, and Russ and I were roommates in our trip all through China with about, 6 or 7 different cities. And it was a great experience, but we were not successful in establishing associations with Chinese universities because at the end of it was right at the end of the Cultural Revolution, and the universities were still not functioning again. The term is rusticating. They had sent the professors and other intellectuals out to work with the peasants to see how the peasants lived and helping them to plant rice and deal with night soil and so forth. So but we visited universities, and it was not very enlightening, except realizing that the universities were not functioning at that time. But it was a great experience, saw a lot of China, learned a lot about China. And so Russ and I have remained very close. And it's a real loss. He died several months ago. And I was George Kinney's first postdoctoral student. He was a new faculty member, and I did a infectious disease study for my master's thesis. They were the closest people, and Tom kept taking risks with me intermittently, and so I am very grateful for them. I think it's very important to acknowledge the people who help you, and I fortunately have had the opportunity to do that for most of the important people in my life.
Well, you've alluded several times to Tom taking risks with you, but it sounds like he never got stung, so he never had any reason to not support you. One of the things I was struck by was what a globetrotter you were in some ways with your work in the Solomon Islands and Papua New Guinea and United Kingdom and Taiwan, and then being part of that delegation that President Hogness put together. Were there any other places that you worked? And especially since we are on the verge of starting the Department of Global Health, it seems like there were both a lot of students from abroad in the department and a lot of teachers from other countries in the department and then the school, and that we also sent a fair amount of people abroad to either work or do their research.
Yes. Well, one of my last doctoral students was from Zimbabwe. Godfrey Welk did his dissertation project with me on intergenerational growth, actually. And he's now chairman of the Department of Social Medicine at the University of Zimbabwe. And we correspond very intermittently with by email. So I had an opportunity to spend 10 days in Zimbabwe. This was back, 1995 or something like that, when Zimbabwe was still a hopeful country. But conditions have changed, but Godfrey hangs in there. I hope things will change for the better soon. I don't know. I think I've talked about every place I've worked. I was invited to be in a summer training program in demography at the East-West Center in Honolulu at the University of Hawaii. I think I did that 2 summers for brief periods of time. This intergenerational growth, in effect, it's physical anthropology. It's what some anthropologists do.
Yeah,
so I've come, what goes around comes around, I guess, can be said.
Well, you've seen a lot of changes in the department and the school. I noticed in that departmental photograph from 1964, if my memory serves me, that there were 2 women.
Yes. Ruth Portman was a statistician, and Jordan Foy, I guess, was the second postdoctoral fellow. She is now an emeritus professor of epidemiology, so she spent her career here in infectious diseases. There are 2 women now. What is it? It's 50%, or maybe even more.
Close, if not, and certainly the student body.
I don't know what we do without the women. Of course, I'm a maternal and child health expert, so I naturally like to see women in our programs. And we've had I've had some very important women colleagues.
Well, there's
And students.
all sorts of issues that public health addresses these days, from bioterrorism to the emerging infectious diseases and the effects of globalization. With the spread of West Nile virus or avian flu. What were some of the issues, and you have touched on this already, speaking about questions of intergenerational growth and health, but recall for us, if you could, some of the issues, challenges that were current in the 40 years or so that you spent in the field.
Well, one of the, of course, when I started out, the strength of the department was infectious disease because of Tom and Russ and George Kinney. And so I decided, that was a logical area for me to look at for my own work, but then I decided, quite frankly, that I couldn't compete with those guys, and I needed to go off in my own direction. And as a pediatrician, I decided, one of the professors of pediatrics, Dave Shurtleff, who was another mentor of mine, got me interested in birth defects, and I went from birth defects, which are very difficult to study, into more general maternal and child health issues. And now, I end up deciding that almost everything of importance is interrelated, and I think it's a perspective I have learned from my anthropological background and my work in 2 interdisciplinary programs, that almost everything is interrelated. And I hope that the new Department of Global Health deals with these interrelationships better than has been done in the past, because poverty is, of course, one of the main risk factors for all sorts of problems. And globalization has increased poverty in some areas, and it's not, and the real problems are not going to be solved in the laboratory, in my view. It's going to be solved in dealing with the environments, because we're not going to change the DNA, but we can change environments. And that's, and I hope that the new department deals, and others deal with the issues of poverty. And poverty affects everything. It affects health, it affects learning,
just access to the basics of life.
It affects, absolutely, and it affects one of the main things it affects is learning, the ability to learn, and growth affects the ability to learn. And we live in a technologically dependent world, and so learning capacity is of prime importance, and anything that reduces the ability to learn has profound effects. And I think we are faced with the question of sustainability and survival of our species. I think I'm coming back again to anthropology and evolution. We are faced with an evolutionary crisis, I think, an environmental crisis in our own country and in the world. It's not just global warming. It's all sorts of,
Again, back to the basics: clean water,
yeah,
sanitation.
That's right.
Access to food. I mean, the gap between the rich and the poor within our country and outside our country is growing, and that represents, to my mind, also one of the greatest of the challenges facing us, this increasing chasm between rich and poor.
Well, yeah, when I was teaching international health, I got interested in some work by an Englishman named Maurice King, who edited a book called Medical Care in Developing Countries. He had worked for years at the Makerere Medical School in Uganda, which before Idi Amin was a really good place. As a matter of something that was established by the British when they were colonial powers. And this guy, what he said was the main problem is not climate and it is poverty. The main problem in the third world countries is poverty. And he and his colleagues in this symposium that he organized came up with ways of developing appropriate technology for dealing with health problems. And I think this guy invented the concept of appropriate technology for health, which is what PATH, what the organization called PATH does. And actually, I proposed him for a Walker Ames fellowship, and he came here a number of years ago. And what he talked about, what his evolving interest was, that we're exceeding the carrying capacity of the earth, that there are too many people and not enough resources and not enough arable land for food, and the arable land is being destroyed for various environmental reasons and for population increase. People have to live someplace, and so they reduce the amount of farmland to build homes so people can have houses, and everything is interrelated. And I think that's what people in public health have to come to realize and be the leaders in getting these ideas across.